So looking back at your co-founding of Mirador, and you were the CEO of that as well. What are some of the mistakes that you made in that, as a first-time founder
Gosh,
that
yeah.
you made that you realized, okay, I'm not going to make those mistakes in my next startup, which hopefully you haven't.
Oh gosh, there's so many. Which
Well, I
ones?
know that I
Yeah,
know
there's so
it's
many.
always so many.
Which
Pick
do I
the top
start?
two or three, the highlights.
All right. Well, I'd say maybe my top one was not focusing on the commercial side of it soon enough. I
Mm,
think when I started Mirador, I kind of was very focused on the product and thought, okay, I need to build out this product. I need to get this really great product that people are going to
yeah.
love, and then I'll figure out how to kind of sell it. And I think that was a mistake for two reasons. One is it just delayed revenue, which just
hmm
makes it,
Harder.
harder to go faster
That's
when you don't
right.
have the revenue coming in.
hmm
But more importantly is you learn a lot in the sales
Yeah,
process,
of course you do.
and and it impacts the product as you kind of hear things in the sales process because design research is great, and you learn different things when you're in a sales conversation and people are having to write a check. And so I think if we had focused on that earlier, our product would have, I think, improved faster,
Mm,
and we would have gotten a lot better at how we kind of tell our story and how we market it. And so that's something I really wished we had done differently.
okay.
And so with Carbon Title, we
You,
started off from the get go, like, let's get into these beta
yeah,
conversations
very
and let's
smart.
get people to
hmm
commit, even if it's at a highly discounted rate
Right.
or
Well,
some of
right.
them getting it, for free.
hmm
So um, that was a big one. I think the second one was really focusing on culture in hires and particularly the leadership team.
Yep.
That, I had a couple early hires where I thought these folks have had great track records, particularly a couple mishires I had early
hmm
on, were fantastic at what they did, great track records, but didn't quite fit culturally
That's
with
right.
what we were doing,
hmm
and it just caused so much friction. And I think that's the other thing as well too, when there's not a cultural fit, you got to just have that open and honest conversation
Yeah.
and not delay it.
Yep.
And my first time around, I kind of hung on thinking like, oh gosh, what are we going to do if this key person leaves? And then you finally gets to a point, you have a conversation and they're like, yeah, I'm not happy here either because of the
hmm
cultural fit. So it was like a very amicable parting of ways. And that should have happened, 6 months earlier at
Well, but
Mirador.
to your point, I mean, this is the reason I ask. First time founder, these are the mistakes that people make, right?
Totally.
For many reasons. And I say this as often as it comes up and as is appropriate. Something in the neighborhood of like 56, north of 50%. Let me just say that. North of 50% of people leave a job in the first 18 months for reasons having nothing to do with their skills and abilities.
Hmm, hmm.
It leaves cultural
That's
fit.
interesting. That is higher than I would have expected. But when
Yeah.
you say it now, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not just necessarily leadership, it's all roles, right?
Everybody. Yeah.
Everybody.
Yeah.
So that number really shouldn't surprise anybody, because so many companies do this really poorly. Or
Yes.
or somebody said, you
Yeah.
paste your vision up on the wall and then think that everybody's just going to like, spontaneously, through osmosis, they're going to get it. Right.
Yes. Yes.
Which
Yes. Totally.
doesn't
And
really happen ever.
100% right. And that's the other, I guess that related to that, that was the other thing I think is at Carbon Title, we've done a better job.
hmm
We have our mission is very clear, get every building to carbon neutral,
Yes.
and people can rally behind that. We spent less time, like I think sometimes companies can probably over engineer kind of the corporate values,
hmm
and they get like spend almost a little bit too much time and they get too many of them, and it's hard to optimize. And like you said, they just end up being a poster on the wall.
hmm
And so we did that at Mirador, and it was really hard for people to absorb it. And a Carbon Title, instead, what we said are, what are the kind of key pillars of our culture?
hmm
And let's pick three or four of them and
hmm
turn those into kind of our values.
hmm
And so, one of them is just, respectful openness, and that like we don't want, if something's not going well, please don't hide it.
hmm
We're always going to be transparent with everybody at the company of how we're doing on revenue,
hmm
how we're doing on, funding, whatever it might be. We're going to be open and honest, and please be open and honest with everybody else in return. If an idea you think is not the right one, got to be respectful, but say it, and then that, and then kind of collaboration and some of these other things that we've thought of. let's turn those into values as opposed to kind of starting from the other way around, and let's not have too many, at least initially.
Mm-hmm. I
Make
think,
sure that we can drive it into our
yeah,
operating
and I think that's
mechanisms.
really smart. My question is as you're talking about this, the terminology I would give it that I use is culture of feedback. And
Yes, I love that term.
well, you're
That's a
welcome
great
to
term,
reuse
Carol.
it. The reason I ask that is because sometimes they think they have a culture of feedback and they really don't.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so my question about that is, you can say this is one of our values and that is having a culture of feedback, but the question is, how do you actually exhibit it? And
yes.
and are you exhibiting it from you personally?
Yes, I think that's where it has to start.
I do too.
You know,
Okay.
one of the tricks that I've kind of done is sometimes people I think are more feel more comfortable sometimes giving feedback one on one than in
Mm-hmm.
necessarily a group. And depending
Mm-hmm.
on the feedback, sometimes it shouldn't be in a group; it should be one on
Mm-hmm.
one. But sometimes if it's like, hey, I've got a real question about the strategy we're going down, or
Mm-hmm.
something like that, a trick that a mentor of mine told me is like, great. If you're having a one-on-one with them, that's great. Talk through it. But then at the end say, hey, this needs to be something that is said with the leadership team and
Right.
needs to be driven through a meeting. So can you please at our next team meeting bring this up? I think it's a very important point,
Yeah.
and get them to bring it up, and then people start seeing, oh yeah, there's feedback happening, and let's have a conversation
Mm-hmm.
and let's discuss it.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and then the other piece I heard too is if you get into a situation where somebody's having friction with another employee, you say, hey, I need you to go talk to them and give them that feedback. And if you don't feel comfortable, I'm happy to be there as part of the conversation, or we can figure out a way to have it be comfortable. But you need to be able to get you to a spot where
Mm-hmm.
you're able to have a conversation in a way that's respectful and builds the
Mm-hmm.
relationship. And it's
Right.
easier said than done, but those are a couple things that I've tried. I kind of learned in Mirador,
Yeah.
that a mentor of mine kind of said, hey, maybe you ought to try these, and that we're trying to do from the get-go here at
Mm-hmm.
Carbon Title.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That's certainly part of the work that I do. And I'm in fact in a project like this right now. And,
Okay.
I make it clear to people, just because the CEO says, "Here, we're going to build a culture of feedback and this is what that means," doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow. There
Yes,
are
yes.
steps that you have to put in place to actually bring that through to fruition, because a culture of feedback is not just you exhibiting it yourself. It is peers have to be able to do it with each other, and subordinates have to be able to go to their managers and be able to have that without fear
Yes,
of
yes.
negative repercussions. And that kind of thing doesn't, and if you've got anybody on your team that's like, F you, I'm not getting involved in that. Well, you either if
Yeah.
they're open to coaching, you coach them through it. And if they're not, you probably need to replace them.
Agree. I
Right?
completely agree. Yeah. And I think a big part of that is if you're a manager or CEO is admitting you're wrong when you're wrong
Right.
and doing that kind of publicly. And I think
Yes.
that's a big one. And
Mm-hmm.
especially if it's come from, somebody else with an idea and saying, you know what, this is a great idea. I didn't see that. I think that this is the way we should go.
Yeah.
And admitting when you're wrong, I think is
Mm-hmm.
a big piece of it.
Carol Schultz here. Thanks for watching this excerpt from Authentically Successful. The conversation doesn't end there. So if you want to hear this episode in full and all my conversations with many other successful founders and CEOs, please visit verticalelevation.com/podcast.